What were you before the world taught you what to be? From the oldest clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia, pressed by hands that are now dust, there comes a story so primordial it feels less like history and more like memory. A dream the human race once shared and has never quite forgotten. The Sumerians knew it. The Babylonians carried it forward like an ember through centuries of darkness, and at its heart moves a figure unlike any other, a being born not of woman, not of war, but of wilderness itself. Hair like long grass, eyes like still water, a creature who ran with lions and drank beside the gazelle, who had never known a wall, a wheel, or a word for king. He existed before civilization drew its first boundary and told the world what belonged inside and what must remain beyond. Welcome to the story of Enkidu and the wild world before civilization. Now lie back, breathe slowly, and let the ancient world take over. Before the first wall was raised, before the first name was spoken into the waiting air, there was only this, a vast and breathing stillness, grass reaching to every horizon, pale and silver in the hour before dawn. The sky above the Mesopotamian plain hung heavy with the last of the night, deep purple fading at its edges to the faintest suggestion of another day. No road crossed this land, no lamp burned in it. The wind moved through the tall grass in long, slow waves, as though the earth itself were sleeping, drawing breath, turning gently in its ancient dreams. Something was about to happen here. The world did not yet know what. It simply waited, open and enormous, under that slowly brightening sky. Far from that sleeping steppe, in a place older than distance, Aruru knelt alone. There was no ground beneath her, not truly, only a darkness so complete it felt almost soft, almost kind. Around her, faint points of cold light hung like memories of stars. Her hands were pressed together, fingertip to fingertip, and her eyes were closed. She was remembering. She had made things before, hills, the hollow of a collarbone, the particular curve of a river's turning. But tonight, a different shape moved through her mind. It was made of sky stuff, of longing. She could feel the weight of it already, the dense and sleeping mass of something not yet alive. Her hands parted slowly. She would need clay. She would need the deep, still river clay, cool and gray and full of dreaming. So she closed her eyes, and in the warm dark behind them, she called to mind the face of Anu, ancient father of the sky, whose shoulders held the weight of all the stars above. She did not summon him as a prayer. She simply held him there the way one holds a lamp against the wind. His beard like winter cloud, his stillness vast and unhurried, the horned crown, the gold hem, the long silence of something that had existed before silence had a name. She let his shape settle into her, bone by bone, breath by breath, until she could feel the outline of him glowing softly behind her ribs. Then she knelt. The riverbank received her weight with the soft, yielding, cool mud pressing up between her fingers as her hands found the earth. She could feel the river breathing beside her, its slow, dark current, its smell of deep water and silt and old stone. She gathered the clay with both palms, pressing, lifting, beginning to shape. Every touch was deliberate. A thumb traced the line of a shoulder. Her fingers worked the curve of a jaw with the patience of someone who had done this before. In other ages, in other darkness, she pressed love into the hollows of the clay the way water presses into stone. Not forcing, only finding the shape that was already waiting there. The night held still around her. Even the river seemed to slow, listening, as though it understood that something was being made that the world had never yet held. Then it was there, not moving, not breathing, but there undeniably the way a mountain is there, settled into its own weight as though it had always occupied that particular shape in the world. Broad shoulders rose from the shallows like river stones worn smooth by centuries. Long dark hair lay matted across the chest and arms, thick as winter pelt, catching the moonlight in soft blue-gray threads. The hands were vast. The jaw was heavy. Everything about the form spoke of something built not for delicacy, but for endurance, for running, for lifting, for standing in open wind without flinching. The river curled gently around its legs, tasting the clay, and the moonlight settled over it all like a held breath. It was not yet alive, but it was waiting, and the waiting itself felt like a kind of power. Aruru leaned down. Her breath was slow, deliberate, the breath of someone who understood the weight of what she was about to give. Anu had pressed it into her like a seed pressed into soil. The wide breath of the sky, the same breath that sent storms rolling across the plain and then, just as easily, left the world utterly still. She held it a moment longer, feeling it warm against the back of her teeth. Then she let it go, softly, steadily, into the parted clay mouth below her. Nothing moved. Then something did. Deep inside the chest of the figure, something shifted, like a sleeper turning toward morning. The river felt it. The moonlight felt it. Even the dark felt it. A finger moved, just one, the smallest curling slowly against the wet river stones, as though testing what the world was made of. Then the chest rose. Then it fell. Then it rose again, steady and enormous, like a tide finding its rhythm for the very first time. Enkidu opened his eyes. They were dark and very wide and full of stars. Not the reflection of stars, the stars themselves, as though the night sky had decided to look at itself through something new. He lay in the shallows, water moving in cold silver threads around his shoulders, and he did not move. He did not need to. He was already complete, already whole in a way that needed no name, no word, no understanding. He simply was, fully, perfectly. The river ran on around him, unhurried the way rivers have always run, as though the world had been waiting a long time for something to witness it, and now, at last, it had. Then he rose, slowly as water poured from the long curtains of his hair, as it ran in cold streams down the broad plains of his chest, and gathered in rivulets between his toes. Enkidu straightened to his full height. He stood at the river's edge, and the steppe opened before him like a held breath finally released, flat and vast and golden at its far rim, where the dawn was just beginning to blush the sky. He had no word for any of it, no word for the smell of wet earth warming in the early light, no word for the way the horizon seemed to lean toward him. Curious, he simply stood, and the world spread out in every direction, and neither he nor the world found anything strange in this. A heron lifted from the shallows somewhere to his left. The steppe breathed. So did he. He walked into the grass. It came up past his waist, then his chest, a sea of dry gold stalks that shifted and whispered as he moved through them. He slowed. He held out both hands, letting the blades drag across his palms, each one a small, cold line. The grass spoke differently than the river had. Where water had rushed and swallowed, this rustled and leaned, bending away, then returning, closing behind him like a door softly shut. The wind moved through in long, slow waves, and Enkidu felt it on his face a moment before the stalks felt it below. He learned this. He stood still and watched the ripple travel toward him from the far edge of the meadow, and then he felt it on his skin, and it was the same thing. He did not have a word for that either. He only smiled. Then the gazelles came. They swept out of the east like a thrown handful of light, 30 of them, perhaps more, their hooves barely kissing the earth before lifting again. Enkidu watched them for one held breath. Then he ran. He did not decide to run. His legs simply knew. He fell into the herd the way a river falls into the sea, without seam, without effort, and suddenly he was among them, his long dark hair streaming back from his face, his bare feet finding the same rhythm the gazelles had always known. Dust rose around him in pale curtains. The blue sky wheeled overhead. The animals did not scatter. They simply made room the way water makes room for a stone that has always belonged to the river. Enkidu had no word for joy, but his chest was full of something large and warm and fast, and his face had opened into a shape that needed no name at all. By late afternoon, his feet had carried him to the great watering hole. It lay in a hollow of the steppe like a dark mirror, wide and still, rimmed with tall grass that swayed in the cooling air. Dozens of creatures had gathered there, lions standing shoulder deep, their great heads lowered to drink, deer pressed close together, ears turning like small copper bowls catching sound, wild bulls with their heavy necks bowed, their breath steaming in the cooling air. Birds of every color moved along the shallows, red and gold in the deep blue of a sky just before dark. Enkidu waded in among them. No creature flinched, no lion lifted its head. The water was cold around his feet, then his knees, and it carried the smell of deep earth and green growing things. He lowered his face and drank. The sun slipped toward the horizon, pouring long gold light across the surface of the water, and everything was still. When the sun was gone, the steppe cooled quickly. The lions moved as lions do, without ceremony, without choosing, and simply lay down in the long grass near the water's edge. One by one, their great heads lowered, and the night settled over them like a hand placed gently on a sleeping child. Enkidu lay down among them. He curled close to the largest, a lioness whose ribs rose and fell in a long, slow rhythm, and her warmth reached him the way firelight reaches a cold wall, steady, unhurried, sure. The stars above were countless. They did not ask anything of him. The grass smelled of the day's heat slowly releasing itself into the dark, and somewhere not far off, a night bird called once and was quiet. He slept. His breath found the same rhythm as theirs, rising and falling together, a single body of warmth beneath the wide and watching sky. Morning came the way it always did, slowly, and then all at once. Enkidu rose before the animals, drawn by the sound of water he could hear through the grass. He followed it to a wide, shallow river where the current moved in long, pale ribbons across smooth stone, and he waded in without hesitation, the cold pressing up around his ankles and shins. He stood there a moment, face lifted to the pale gold sky. Then he lowered himself and drank straight from the moving water, cupping nothing, letting the current find his mouth. It tasted of silt and snowmelt, of root and rain and distant hillside. Every place the river had passed through, every stone it had worn smooth, every creature that had ever knelt at its bank, all of it was here, moving through him now. He rose, water bright on his beard, and was still. Later he walked into the cedar grove, where the afternoon light fell in long amber shafts between the trunks, and the air smelled of resin and warm bark and old silence. A great cedar lay where it had fallen long ago, longer than any man could say. Its trunk was wider than Enkidu was tall, its bark peeling back in long red curls, its weight pressed deep into the soft earth beneath. He crouched beside it, ran one hand along the underside, where the wood was still cool and faintly damp. Then he lifted it, not with effort, not with struggle. He simply gathered it in his arms the way another creature might lift a river stone turned smooth by seasons, and held it there a moment, curious about the weight of so much time. He set it back down gently. The grove was quiet. Night came softly to the steppe, pulling a dark cloth across the last pale threads of dusk. Enkidu climbed a low rise in the land and sat, not because he was tired, simply because the world had something to say, and he wished to hear it. The owls began first, low, hollow notes passing between them across the dark grass, like a conversation too old to have a beginning. Then, far out on the plain, the aurochs moved. He could not see them, but he felt the low trembling of the earth beneath his legs, a slow thunder rising and fading as the great herd shifted in the dark. The river murmured somewhere to the west, its voice constant and patient, the way water always speaks, without urgency, without stopping. Beetles clicked in the dry stems around him. Something small and quick rustled through the grass below the hill and was gone. Enkidu sat perfectly still among all of it. His eyes were open. His breathing was slow. He belonged to every sound, the way a stone belongs to the river that shaped it. Not far from there, in the gray hour before the sun had fully committed to rising, a boy moved along the boundary between the open steppe and the first thin fields of settled land. Sumukan child had walked this line since he was small enough to lose himself in the tall grass. He knew where the animals came to drink, where they pressed their paths through the stems, where a careful loop of sinew could hold a creature still until morning. He crouched now over the nearest snare and found it broken. The stake pulled clean from the earth, the cord torn and flung aside. The second was the same, then the third. He straightened slowly, turning to read the churned mud around him. Something large had come through here, something that had simply walked through his careful work as though it were nothing at all. He knelt. There in the soft, dark mud beside the water's edge was a footprint. No, not a footprint, a presence pressed into the earth. It was vast, longer than his forearm from wrist to elbow. The heel sunk deep where great weight had rested. The toes spread wide and far apart, each one leaving its own deliberate mark, the way an animal's do, the way a man's never do, not unless he has walked his whole life without sandals, without roads, without the hardened ground of any courtyard or street. The boy stared. He pressed his own small hand into the impression, and it disappeared inside it entirely. He pulled it back and looked at the mud still clinging to his fingers. He ran home with the mud still on his fingers. The dwelling was low and warm, firelight pressing against the walls in slow orange waves. His father sat near the hearth the way old men do, very still, as though stillness itself had settled into him over many years. The boy spoke quickly at first, then slower, searching for words large enough to hold what he had seen. The size of the figure, the way the gazelles had moved with it, not beside it. The eyes, open and calm as standing water, belonging to no place that had a name. His father did not speak for a long moment. He looked into the fire. When he finally turned, his face carried something older than surprise, a recognition, almost the way a man looks when he hears a story he has always half believed. The road to Uruk was long and offered no shade. The boy walked it the next morning with the sun climbing ahead of him, the city still a pale suggestion on the horizon, a dark line of walls no taller yet than a thumbnail held at arm's length. The road itself was rutted deep by cartwheels and the hooves of oxen, the dust so fine it rose at each step and settled slowly, coating his feet to the ankle. On either side ran the irrigation ditches, full and slow, smelling of wet earth and green reed and the particular richness of soil that has been turned and fed for 1,000 years. He carried the story in his chest. It sat there heavily, the way a stone sits at the bottom of still water. Then the walls rose up. They appeared first as a pale line at the edge of the world, no taller than a thumb held to the horizon. But the road kept carrying him forward, and the line kept growing, and soon there was no mistaking it. Fired brick stacked high as a cliff face, sun-warmed to the color of old honey, stretching left and right until it seemed to close off the sky itself. Towers rose at intervals, and above them the tops of temples pressed upward, pale against the deep blue afternoon. From somewhere beyond the walls came sound, not wind, not the cry of a bird, but the layered, unmistakable noise of many thousands of people living. A hum, a breathing, a city. Within those walls, in a room held up by cedar columns as tall and straight as ancient trees, Gilgamesh sat. The oil lamps burned low along the room's length, and their light moved slowly across the cedar grain, as though the wood itself were breathing. He listened. The trapper stood somewhere near the far edge of the lamplight, small there, half swallowed by shadow, and his voice came forward alone. Gilgamesh did not move. His hands rested open on the arms of the throne, and his dark eyes were still, not afraid, not scornful. Something quieter lived behind those eyes, a recognition without a name, the way a man might hear a distant sound and feel, before he understands it, that it matters. He sat with it. The lamps flickered once. He said nothing yet, but something in him had already leaned forward. So a messenger was sent. Out through the lamplit corridors of the palace, out into the warm night streets of Uruk, to the temple of Ishtar, where the oil lamps never fully slept. Shamhat was standing at the doorway when he arrived, as if she had half expected something to come for her this evening. She had that quality, a stillness that felt like readiness. Her black hair fell loose to her waist, and the incense smoke curled slowly around her, white against the dark. She listened to the messenger without interrupting. When he finished, she looked out past him toward the step she could not see but somehow already felt. Vast, breathing, unknowing. She asked only one question, not what was the creature, nor how large, nor how dangerous. She asked, "How long has he been alone?" No one could answer her. So she rose before the city woke, wrapped herself in saffron linen, and went. The gates of Uruk stood open in the pale gray hour before sunrise, and Shamhat passed through them without looking back. The trapper walked ahead, his sandals quiet on the dust. She carried a small bundle, flatbread, dried figs, a clay flask of water, and nothing more. The steppe opened before her like a long exhaled breath, the sky above it still holding the last bruised purples of night. The grass stirred at the edge of the road. Somewhere distant, a bird called once and fell silent. Shamhat walked steadily, her dark hair loose at her back, her eyes on the horizon where the first thin thread of gold was beginning slowly to appear. By the time she reached the watering hole, the sun was already leaning westward, pulling long shadows from the grass. Shamhat set down her bundle and settled herself at the water's edge, folding her legs beneath her saffron robe. The pool lay still and dark before her, holding the sky's reflection like a shallow bowl holds rain. She did not pace. She did not call out. Across the steppe, a small herd of gazelles moved in the middle distance, unhurried, grazing toward the water without yet reaching it. Shamhat watched them and said nothing. She had learned long ago that certain things arrive only in their own time, that waiting itself, done with care and an open hand, is a kind of welcome. So she sat, and the light softened around her, and the world went quietly gold. Then he was simply there. No sound had announced him, no crunch of dry grass, no scatter of stones. One moment, the low hill at the water's edge held nothing but fading light, and the next it held Enkidu. He stood at the crest, with the sun burning orange behind him, so that his great outline blazed against the sky. The tangle of his hair, the broad shelf of his shoulders, the rough edge of the hide at his waist. He was enormous. He was utterly still. He had never seen anything like her. Shamhat did not move. She did not lower her eyes or turn away. She simply held his gaze the way still water holds the moon, calmly, completely, without effort. The gazelles at the pool's far edge lifted their heads. A long breath passed through the grass. Enkidu stared, and the last light of the day fell warm across his face, and something in him went very quiet. She stood on one side of the water. He stood on the other. Between them, the pool held the sky's last fire, orange and copper and a deepening rose, broken only where a single ripple moved from nowhere to nowhere, and then was still again. Shamhat did not speak, neither did he. There was nothing yet in Enkidu that knew what words between two people could be. But there was something that knew this, that the creature across the water was not prey, not rival, not part of the herd. Something wholly other, something that looked back. He had never been looked at before. Not truly. The animals beside him had always looked past him, through him, the way light moves through water without stopping. But her eyes rested on him the way his own hands rested on still ground, present, deliberate, and without any wish to leave. She did not speak at first. She let the fire settle between them, its small warmth rising with the morning. And then she reached into the fold of her robe and drew out a round, flat loaf of bread. She held it toward him, unhurried, the way one offers water to someone who does not yet know they are thirsty. "This," she said softly, "is what grain becomes when it meets fire and the patience of human hands." She turned it slowly, letting him see the slight char along the bottom crust, the pale gold of its face. "It began as a seed in the earth," she told him, "something tended, harvested, ground between stones, something that did not exist in the world until people made it so. She broke it. The sound was quiet and clean. She set one half beside him on the grass, and she ate from the other without ceremony, without rush, as though eating together were simply the most natural thing two living creatures could do. Enkidu did not reach for the bread immediately. He watched her eat, the way one animal watches another drink before deciding whether the water is safe. Then, slowly, he drew the half-loaf toward him across the grass. He held it in both cupped palms. It was so small there. His hands were enormous, wide as river stones, scarred from years of catching and climbing and pressing through reeds. And the bread sat in them like something fragile, like a thing that might dissolve if he gripped too firmly. He brought it close and breathed it in. Warm grain and char and something faintly smoky. Nothing the wild had ever offered him smelled like this. The steppe smelled of dust and dew and the green blood of torn grass. This was different. This had been changed by human hands. He pressed it gently with one thumb. It yielded. He pressed again, slower, feeling how it held together, yielding but not breaking, soft but made. Shamhat watched him from across the small fire, the flames drawing warm color into her cheeks. She had been quiet for a time, letting him hold the bread in his hands without hurry. Then she began to speak of Gilgamesh. She did not speak of walls or armies. She spoke of a man who could not sleep, who walked the ramparts of his city in the deep of night, looking out toward the steppe as though something beyond the horizon owed him an answer. She spoke of his strength, how it moved through everything he did like a current beneath still water. She spoke of his beauty and of the loneliness that lived just behind it, which no one in Uruk had ever been able to reach. "He has never met anyone like himself," she said softly. "Not once, not in all his years." The fire shifted. A small ember released and rose. Enkidu listened. His hands were still. The bread sat warm and forgotten between his palms. He woke before the light fully came. The steppe was still pale and cool, the sky barely pink at its edge, when Enkidu rose and walked toward the herd as he had always done, without thought, without hesitation, the way a hand moves toward warmth. The gazelles heard him first, their heads lifted all at once, ears swiveling, and then they were gone, leaping away in every direction, their hooves scattering dry earth, their bodies vanishing into the low morning haze. Before he had taken 3 more steps, he stopped. The dust they left behind hung in the still air, turning soft and golden where the first light caught it. Then it too was gone. Enkidu stood alone in the empty meadow. His chest rose and fell. He looked at his own hands, the same size, the same strength, and could not understand what the animals had seen that made them run from him. That night, he went to the lions. He had slept among them for as long as he could remember. Their great warm bodies pressed against the earth, their slow breath rising and falling like the tide of some dark sea. He knew the hollow in the grass where they curled together, the particular smell of them, like iron and dry fur, and something ancient beneath both. But as he came near, they rose, one by one, without urgency, without fear, simply rising, as though they had somewhere else to be. They did not run. They walked softly and deliberately into the tall grass beyond the grove's edge, and the darkness swallowed them whole. Then they watched him. He could feel it. 2 gold lights, then 4, then more, steady and calm in the black between the stems. Not angry, not afraid, simply watching, the way one watches something that has moved to the far side of a river. He did not know how long he knelt there, only that at some point the watching stopped, and the darkness between the grass stems was simply darkness again. So he rose and walked to the low hill at the grove's edge and sat. He held his hands in his lap, turned them over slowly, the way one turns a stone found at the bottom of a river, familiar in shape, strange in feeling. The palms were the same palms, the same thick fingers, the same calloused skin worn smooth by bark and stone and cold water. Yet something looked back at him through them that had not been there before. He could not name it. The wild had never asked him to name anything. But this was a question that sat inside him like a smooth weight, pressing gently downward. He looked at the moonlit steppe, spreading away in all directions, vast and silent and unchanged. He was the one who had changed. He stayed there a long while, his hands open in his lap, feeling the distance that now lived between him and everything he had always known. Morning came slowly, the way it does when the world is not yet sure of itself. A pale warmth gathered at the eastern edge of the steppe, soft as held breath. Shamhat found him still sitting at the water's edge. She did not speak at first. She knelt beside him in the damp grass, drew a small knife from her belt, and began to cut her saffron robe along its length. One long, deliberate stroke. Then she rose and draped the severed half around Enkidu's broad shoulders. He sat very still. The linen settled against his skin, strange and light. He had felt rain, wind, the rough press of animal hide. This was something else entirely, something given. Shamhat smoothed the cloth at his shoulder with both hands, unhurried, the way one arranges something that matters. He let her. The morning light warmed the yellow fabric, and for a moment it glowed like a small, quiet flame. He turned then to face the east. The sun was just breaking the edge of the world, spilling amber and deep gold across the flat steppe in long, liquid bands. The tall grass caught the light and held it, each blade burning separately, 1,000 small flames standing still in the windless morning. The watering hole lay quiet beside him, its surface smooth as polished clay, the sky's colors pooling there in silence. He had watched the sun rise from this place more times than memory could hold. He had watched it from the water, from the grass, from the warm flank of a sleeping animal. He had never watched it the way he watched it now, as something he was leaving. The distant hills sat low and gray gold on the horizon, unhurried as they had always been. He breathed the cool air in slowly, dry grass and open earth, the faint smell of water. He let it fill him and held it there a moment longer. Then he let it go. Shamhat was already a few steps ahead on the narrow path, her saffron robe catching the low morning light, and she did not look back. She simply walked, trusting that he would follow. He did. The path was a thin thing. It cut through the tall grass as if the land had forgotten it was there, as if it had grown more from habit than intention. Enkidu felt it beneath his bare feet, packed earth, harder than the open steppe, worn smooth by 1,000 journeys he had never made. With each step, the watering hole grew smaller behind him. He did not turn to look, but he felt it receding the way you feel a fire cool when you move away from it. The grass thinned, the smell of water faded. Ahead, on the far horizon, the low, dark outline of Uruk waited, patient and still. Behind him, the watering hole settled back into itself. The gazelles returned first, stepping lightly through the tall grass, lowering their heads to drink without hesitation. Then the aurochs, slow and sure, moving in from the western plain, as though nothing had changed. The water received them all. It did not remember the shape of the hands that had so often disturbed it, nor the weight of the body that had once slept along its edge. The grass stood up where his footprints had been. The mud closed over. A pair of cranes landed near the southern reeds and folded their long wings with a sound like a slow sigh. The steppe did not mourn. It had held Enkidu the way it held the rain, fully, for a season, and then not at all. The sun moved across the open sky as it had always moved. The wind came low from the north and swept through the dry grass, whispering to no one in particular. The wild world continued, unhurried, whole, complete without him. But Enkidu did not look back. He walked until the steppe gave way to packed earth, and the packed earth gave way to stone, and the stone rose before him into something his hands had never known, a wall. A great wall of fired brick, warm from the long day's sun, stretching left and right beyond the edges of his sight. It rose above him the way a cliff rises, the way a thunderhead rises, except that this was made, every brick pressed by a hand, every course laid by a hand, 10,000 hands perhaps, across 10,000 days. He stopped. Above the wall the city murmured, voices, fire, the low knock of wood and copper, the smell of bread and oil, and something sweet he had no name for. The light coming over the top was warm and orange, the color of embers. Slow and careful, Enkidu pressed one broad palm flat against the brick. It was warm, warm the way a living thing is warm. He stood there in the last of the twilight, his hand against the wall, and breathed.